Imagine a city whose origins date back so far that its foundations seem to whisper of forgotten stories. Before Jerusalem became the spiritual center of Israel, it was Bus, the impregnable fortress of the Jebusites, an enigmatic people who have bravely withstood the tests of time. The Jebusites were one of the most mysterious and fascinating peoples in biblical history, the original inhabitants of the area we know today as Jerusalem, long before David arrived. They had already established their fortified city called Bus. Imagine a people who were able to adapt to the challenges of mountainous terrain and turn its constraints into a nearly impenetrable strategic defense in a world of perpetual conflict. The Jebusites learned to endure and thrive, preserving their identity over the centuries. Their resilience makes us wonder how often we face adverse situations that require strength and strategy to overcome. The story of the Jebusites is intertwined with the great biblical plot, notably when King David conquers Jerusalem, which is in fact the capital of Israel. This conquest was not only military but a historical turning point that marked the destiny of a city called to become the spiritual heart of many generations. But before David, the Jebusites had already shaped this place, leaving their mark on its culture and architecture. It is fascinating to think that many of the foundations that David found were the result of the hard work of its ancient inhabitants. To understand the Jebusites, we must go back to the Bronze Age, a time when city-states flourished in Canaan. It was a time of innovation and rivalry, where cities competed for power and influence thanks to their strategic position. The Jebusites became an influential people, although modest in numbers. This reminds us of the importance of small, strategic decisions in our lives. Just as their choice to settle in Jebus gave them an advantage over their neighbors, the name Jebus already evokes something significant, a place of safety. The Jebusians knew how to take advantage of the rugged terrain surrounded by deep valleys as a natural fortress. This strategic choice was decisive for their survival in times of war. In our lives, we often underestimate the importance of a good foundation, whether emotional, spiritual, or physical. The Jebusians remind us that the foundation on which we build our lives makes all the difference. David's conquest of Jerusalem marked the end of Jebusian supremacy, but not the erasure of its history. It is as if the city carried within itself the memories of these ancient builders, even when new leaders took control. How many times in our lives have we built something that, even though it was taken over by others, still reflects the essence of our effort? The Jebusians teach us that even in loss there is a legacy that can transcend generations. These people lived in a world where control of a city meant power, influence, and survival. So the battle for Jebus was not just a fight for territory, but for the soul of a city that would become the gateway to something much greater. Jerusalem would not simply be a city, it would become a symbol of faith, resistance, and transformation. The origins of the Jebusites date back to page 10, where in chapter 10 they are mentioned as descendants of Canaan, son of Ham. This reference integrates them into a vast network of peoples who populated the region of Canaan, known for its ethnicity and cultural diversity. This detail reminds us that biblical genealogies are not simple lists of names, but true historical and spiritual maps that help us understand the deep ties between different peoples. After all, how many times do we neglect our own origins without realizing how much they influence who we are? Today, in Ezekiel 1:63, a fascinating reference is made to Jerusalem, evoking its mixed roots between Amorite and Hittite. This passage suggests that the Jebusites were not an isolated people, but were part of a larger context with diverse influences that enriched their uniqueness. They reflected the complexity of Canaan, a land where cultures and languages intersected. Imagine the richness of these cultural interactions and how they evolved, shaped both the city of Jebus and its inhabitants. The debate over the ethnic and linguistic composition of the Jebusians continues to captivate researchers. Some highlight Semitic traits while others identify Urite or even Egyptian elements in their culture. This illustrates how the Jebusians were a synthesis of regional influences. We can learn a valuable lesson from this diversity to value plurality in our own communities. Just as the Jebusians thrived on this cultural richness, we too can find strength in the union of different perspectives. The Bible, when it speaks of the Jebusites, does not describe just a people, but a symbol of resilience and adaptation. The Canaanite lineage to which they belonged was often associated with the challenge that Israel had to face in the conquest of the Promised Land. However, instead of disappearing, the Jebusians left deep marks as an echo of the past that still resonates today. Let us reflect on our own actions, what legacy we leave when we overcome challenges. If this subject fascinates you, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment where you are watching this video. And now in the video, the Jebusians inhabited a strategic land that influenced not only their interactions with other peoples, but also their identity. Their origin in Canaan linked them to a fertile, but also coveted territory. This reminds us that our strengths can sometimes become our greatest challenges, how we manage the blessings and protections that have been entrusted to us. The Canaanite lineage is significant not only historically but also spiritually. It teaches us the complexity of divine and human choices. Why would God allow his people to settle in a land that he had promised to Israel? Perhaps the answer lies in the way he uses even the enemies of his people to shape them. This invites us to consider the obstacles in our lives as tools for our growth. Reflecting on the origins of the Jebusians, we are led to think about our own roots. Who we are, what our ancestors left us, and how this influences our choices. Just as the Jebusians were part of a plan greater, perhaps our personal stories are pieces of a divine puzzle that is still being built. Before Jerusalem was known as the capital of the Kingdom of Israel, it is called JEBUSEI, a strategic fortress of the Jebusians located in mountains surrounded by deep valleys. The city offered natural protection against invaders, thus becoming a practically impregnable fortress. This strategic position was not only geographical but also spiritual, because the Jebusians considered their land as a gift that connected them to the divine. Imagine how the choice of a place to settle can influence not only the survival but also the identity of a people. The architecture of the JEBUSEI is another aspect fascinating. The Jebusians were at the origin of remarkable innovations such as the Goan Tunnel, which allowed access to water even in times of siege. This system was a testament to their ingenuity and determination. In a world where water was synonymous with life, they transformed this vital necessity into a strategic asset. It is inspiring to think about how we too can transform our basic needs into a lever for success. Beyond the tunnel, the stone platforms and fortified walls testified to the architectural expertise of the Jebusians. These structures were not only functional, but also symbols of power and resilience. Each stone seemed to carry the story of a people determined not to be subjugated. Just as they built solidly, we are invited to build our lives on solid foundations, whatever they may be. The archaeological records of JEBUSEI, including the Amarna letters, reveal the political importance of the city. In these documents, local kings mention Jerusalem as a key strategic center for the region. This reinforces the idea that the city was not simply a safe haven, but also a point of convergence between different cultures and political interests. Just as the JEBUSEI served as a meeting point, our lives can also be enriched by moments in which we become bridges between people and ideas, strengthening their city. The Jebusians showed a long-term vision. They knew that to remain relevant in a region marked by constant conflict, they had to invest in strategies beyond immediate needs. This mentality teaches us the importance of planning for the future. The Jebusite culture was deeply influenced by Canaanite practices, revealing a world rich in religious and social diversity. They were polytheists, worshipping various deities linked to fertility, war, and nature. These gods were not simple mythological figures, but were an integral part of everyday life, reflecting the concerns and aspirations of the people. We can imagine the Jebusians performing rituals in stone hotels, offering sacrifices, and seeking to protect their city. These practices invite us to reflect on the human search for security and meaning. The hierarchical organization of Jebusian society was led by an elite political and religious elite that played a central role in the management of the city. This elite not only the hopes and dreams of a nation converge in our lives. Certain places and moments can become powerful symbols of transformation and meaning. David also initiated cultural projects and administrative structures that made Jerusalem a center of influence. The city attracted people from different regions, creating a diversity that enriched its dynamics. This flow of ideas and talents reminds us that places of exchange and collaboration can produce significant progress. Jerusalem became an example of how dialogue and cooperation can have a lasting impact. The transformation of Jerusalem into the capital was not an isolated event, but the beginning of a journey that would mark the city as an epicenter of biblical and world history. Just as David saw the potential of Jerusalem, we are invited to look at our surroundings with a visionary eye. Every decision we make can become the basis for something much greater than we can imagine. After David's conquest of Jerusalem, the Jebusites did not disappear completely, but underwent a process of gradual integration into Israelite society. Later biblical references such as Zechariah 97 mention the Jebusites in a symbolic way, suggesting that they were assimilated and in some cases even reconciled with divine designs. This mention reminds us that even those who were once considered enemies can find a place in a greater plan. A lesson in reconciliation and transformation. Under Solomon's reign, the remaining Jebusites were recruited to participate in building projects such as those mentioned in the First King. These large works in particular. The temple required a diverse workforce, and the Jebusites contributed their skills and architectural knowledge. This shows us that even in changing and adapting circumstances, each person's skills and contributions can have a significant impact. Let's think about how we can use our talents even in difficult situations to build something greater. The process of assimilation of the Jebusites also involved a cultural and religious adaptation. Although they were integrated, their traditions and identity began to fade into Israelite society. Their disappearance as a distinct ethnic group is an example of how cultures can evolve or disappear over time, depending on the circumstances. This reflection invites us to value the cultures and stories that surround us today before they are completely lost. The continued presence of the Jebusites in Jerusalem after the conquest also indicates a certain level of coexistence and tolerance that is not always emphasized. Although they lost political control, their retention in the city shows that not all conquests lead to the total annihilation of a people. This coexistence can teach us to find ways to live in harmony with those who have different stories and traditions than our own. The cultural assimilation of the Jebusites was natural, especially as the generations passed. Their integration into Israelite society meant that their stories and contributions began to intertwine with those of their conquerors in a broader sense. This reflects how the narratives of different peoples can intertwine to form a richer fabric of history and identity. Let's think about how our own stories are influenced by those who came before us. The early structure of the INR in Jerusalem, built largely by the Jebusites, stood as a testament to their presence even after the conquest. The stone foundations and systems, such as the Gillam Tunnel, were adapted and expanded by the Israelites, but the marks of the Jebusites remained visible. This adaptation of pre-existing structures reminds us that when we build our future, we often rely on the foundations laid by those who came before us. The influence of the Jebusites on biblical texts goes beyond their direct mention as inhabitants of Jebus or adversaries of Israel in the Bible. They appear frequently as one of the Canaanite peoples mentioned in God's promise to Abraham. In Genesis 15 verse 21, they are part of the intended territory for Abraham's descendants, and this reference places them in the context of the divine covenant, showing that their role goes beyond simple opposition to Israel. This connection underscores the central theme of redemption and transformation, suggesting that even adversaries can have a place in the divine plan, an intriguing example of indirection. The Jebusite influence is found in the figure of Melchizedek described in Genesis 14 as the king of Salem and priest of the Most High God. Many scholars identify Salem as a reference to the future Jerusalem, suggesting that Melchizedek represented a spiritual lineage among the Jebusites. This connection indicates that even before Israel there was a reverence for the one God in the region, which reinforces the idea that the Jebusites played a significant spiritual role in this place and invites us to reflect on how the seeds of faith can be present even in unexpected contexts. Extra-biblical texts such as the administered but also define the values and practices that guided the community. Spiritual and political power were often closely linked, showing how religion unified and strengthened authority. This reminds us of the importance of having leaders who defend inspiring and unifying values rather than divisive ones. One of the most fascinating aspects of Jebusian culture is the possible connection between its kings and biblical figures such as Adonijah and Melchizedek. Melchizedek, described in Genesis 14:18 as king of Salem and priest of the Most High God, represents a point of intersection between Jebusite faith and Israelite tradition. This association suggests that Jebusite spirituality may have influenced, to some extent, the religious thought of the time. This invites us to explore how different traditions can meet and enrich each other. The Jebusians had a deep respect for the elements of nature, which is reflected in their veneration of the divinity linked to the earth and the seasons. They perceived in the cycle of life a direct connection with the divine, a perspective that may seem distant in our technological world. However, this connection teaches us the importance of recognizing the hand of God in everything that surrounds us, from the simplest details to the most impressive wonders. In addition to religion, the Jebusian culture excelled in areas such as music and the arts. There is evidence that festivals and celebrations occupied an important place in social life, strengthening community bonds. These moments of joy and creativity, they brought lightness even in difficult times. This reminds us to value moments of celebration and to seek beauty even in the midst of trials. The religious practices of the Jebusians, although distinct, shared common elements with those of other peoples in the region, such as the use of hotels and the organization of seasonal festivals. These practices show that beyond differences there is a universal search for the transcendent. Even today, divergences in our beliefs can be opportunities for learning and growth rather than sources of division. The religion and culture of the Jebusians shaped the identity of the bus and prepared the ground for what Jerusalem would later become. Their practice, although transformed, left deep marks that cannot be ignored. It is fascinating to think that peoples forgotten by history continue to influence the world in a subtle but lasting way. The Jebusians are also known for their fierce resistance to the conquest of Canaan. Led by Joshua and the tribes of Israel were part of a coalition of Canaanite kings led by Adonijah, king of Jerusalem. This alliance mentioned in Joshua 10 illustrates the determination of the Jebusites and their allies to defend their land. Imagine the scene of armies joining forces and marching together to face a common enemy. This unity in times of adversity reminds us how collaboration can be a powerful tool in facing challenges beyond our control. Although the coalition was defeated, the Jebusites continued to resist and maintain control of Jerusalem, even after their initial conquest of the Promised Land. The tribe of Judah temporarily captured the city, but the Jebusites quickly recaptured it, demonstrating their resilience and ability to protect their territory. This episode teaches us that defeat does not mean the end. It is often an invitation to rethink our strategies and to enter again with greater determination. During the period of the Judges, Jerusalem remained a foreign city for the Israelite tribes. The Jebusites continued to live there to defend and preserve their cultural and religious identity. This period of tense coexistence highlights how, even in the midst of conflict, different cultures can find ways to survive side by side. In our own lives, we are often called to coexist with differences, to learn how to manage them while remaining faithful to our own. The strategic location of Jerusalem, at the crossroads of trade routes and surrounded by mountainous terrain, made it a constant object of covetousness and conflict. The Jebusites, aware of this advantage, used the terrain to their advantage to resist Israel's incursions. It invites us to reflect on how we can use our own resources and talents to transform difficult situations into opportunities for victory. The resistance of the Jebusites was not only military, but also cultural and spiritual. They maintained their religious practices and traditions as a way of affirming their identity in the face of external pressure. This determination to preserve who they were can inspire us to value and protect what defines us even when we are confronted with external forces. Even after years of conflict, the Jebusites maintained their presence in Jerusalem, testifying to their resilience. They did not let themselves be beaten by circumstances, but persisted as one people. Their resilience teaches us that in the face of so many difficulties, it is possible to remain firm, trusting in our beliefs and values to overcome challenges. The conquest of Jerusalem by David, reported in 2 Samuel 5, was a decisive step in the history of Israel. The Jebusites, confident in their natural defense and their fortification, thought that their city was impregnable. They even mocked David, claiming that even the blind and the lame could defend it. This overconfidence reminds us that we often underestimate challenges or adversaries. A lesson that resonates in the way we face life's obstacles. David, however, was not intimidated by their provocations. He took a strategic approach, possibly exploiting the Gillam Tunnel, which provided access to water in the city. This tactic illustrated his ability to exceed expectations by exploiting weaknesses that his enemies overlooked. Like David, we are invited to look beyond the evidence, to seek creative solutions to the problems we encounter. The role of Joab, one of David's military leaders, was essential in the conquest. He led the attack, demonstrating courage and initiative, qualities that David rewarded by giving him an important position in his army. This shows that recognizing talents and efforts can transform difficult situations. Sharing victories in our own lives, identifying and supporting those around us, can make all the difference in times of struggle. After the capture of the city, David not only claimed it, he made it his capital, establishing what we call the City of David. This choice was strategic and symbolic, as it brought the tribes of Israel together around a city that originally belonged to none of them. Jerusalem became a symbol of unity and renewal. This gesture reminds us that in the midst of change, we can create something new that benefits everyone around us. David's victory marked the end of JEBUSei's supremacy, but not the erasure of their history. Many remaining Jebusians continued to live in the city, contributing to its evolution. This teaches us that even in transformation, there is room for integration and respect for past history. Acknowledging the past helps us build a stronger, more connected future. The conquest of Jerusalem was much more than a military victory. It was an event charged with deep spiritual significance. David saw the city as the place where God would establish his name, a reflection of his faith and prophetic vision. This moment invites us to reflect on how our own actions can align with something greater than ourselves. What are we doing today that could have a lasting impact? With Jerusalem under his control, David began to transform the city into a political and spiritual center, laying the foundation for what it would become over the centuries. This transition was not simply a matter of power, but of mission. Just as David imagined a future for Jerusalem, we are called to think beyond the present, anticipating the repercussions of our choices on the story of our lives. After the conquest of Jerusalem, David made a decision that forever changed the history of Israel, to make the ancient city of Jebus the capital of his kingdom. This choice was not only political but also strategic and spiritual. Located at a central point between the northern and southern tribes, it was South Jerusalem that facilitated the unity of the people. Imagine the impact of a choice capable of transforming a divided kingdom into a united nation. In the same way that David united Israel, our decisions can become points of convergence for divergent perspectives in our lives. The construction of the City of David marked the beginning of a new chapter for Jerusalem. David strengthened the city's defenses, expanded its structures, and launched projects that made it more habitable and functional. He saw Jerusalem not only as a fortress, but as a center of life and faith. This vision teaches us the importance of planning and investing in something that goes beyond the present moment. What we build today can become a legacy for future generations. The remaining Jebusites were not completely expelled, but integrated into Israelite society. This integration testified to David's pragmatism, who recognized the value of preserving the knowledge and skills of the city's ancient inhabitants. This example invites us to think about how we can include and value different paths in our own projects, thus building something greater than we could achieve alone. Transforming Jerusalem into the capital was also an act of centralization of faith in God. As foundation of the kingdom, David had the Ark of the Covenant brought into the city, symbolizing the divine presence in the heart of Israel. This gesture demonstrated that Jerusalem would not only be a political center, but also a spiritual one. It inspires us to reflect on how we place our deepest values at the center of our decisions. The choice of Jerusalem as our capital had a profound impact on Israel's identity. The city became a symbol of unity, a connection between God's promises and the future of the people. It was not just a geographic location, but a place where we seek that connection, where the temporal takes on eternal meaning. Jerusalem's ongoing transformations are not just about politics or religion, but also about identity. Every stone, every ruin, every reconstruction tells a story of adaptation and renewal. These layers of history reflect the way our own lives are also made up of ups and downs, of victories and defeats that shape us and prepare us for something greater. The story of the JEBUSEI and Jerusalem leaves us with a profound question. What can we learn from a people who laid the foundations of a city that remains at the center of so much hope and strife? This reflection invites us to look at our own history and consider how our contributions can resonate beyond our time, just as the Ongbus continues to resonate in Jerusalem. If this story has touched you in any way, consider applying it to your own journey. Start by recognizing the foundations that support your life, strengthening what already exists, and daring to transform what needs to be changed next. All the JEBUSEI unknowingly laid the groundwork for something great. And you, the groundwork you are preparing now, is your turn. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue diving into stories that not only inform but also transform. Together, we can explore the layers of the biblical story and discover how to apply it in practical and inspiring ways to our daily lives. Thanks for watching, take care, and may God bless you.